Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be covering another unsolved missing persons case. Today's case is on the disappearance of Sabrina Aisenberg. Sabrina Aisenberg was born in Florida on June 27th, 1997 to her parents Marlene Aisenberg and Steve Aisenberg. She was the youngest of 3 siblings. She had an older brother who was 8 years old by the name of William, and an older sister who was 4 years old by the name of Monica. Sabrina Aisenberg had big blue eyes, brown hair, and a birthmark below her right shoulder in the shape of a Y consisting of little dots. Marlene and Steve described their family as very happy and content. That was until the horrific morning of November 24th, 1997. Marlene Aisenberg headed to the kitchen at 6 a.m. that morning to get her day started. It was then that she had a really uneasy feeling that something wasn't right, because the laundry room door was open that led to the garage. She quickly ran to go check on her 5-month-old baby Sabrina, but her stomach dropped and she started screaming when her baby was not in her crib. While on the phone with 911, she was still screaming and in full panic mode, and she got her husband Steve to check on her other 2 children to make sure they were okay. Thankfully they were, but baby Sabrina was nowhere to be found in the house. It was quickly realized by the Aisenberg that they had made the mistake of leaving the garage door open overnight and the door that led into the house from the garage. Steve Aisenberg looks back and realizes that they had a false sense of security living in that middle-class neighborhood. The police arrived soon after and did a full search of the house to see if they could find a ransom note or any evidence of forced entry, or really just any evidence that there was an intruder. And when they couldn't find any of that, Marlene and Steve quickly became prime suspects. The deputies in the case quickly started collecting several items from the Aisenberg house, including the bedding that Sabrina slept in that night, as well as her crib, and they sent it off to the FBI lab for analysis. While all of this was going on, Steve and Marlene released a public appeal pleading for their daughter's safe return. However, instead of getting a lot of sympathy and support from the public, a lot of people actually thought that their demeanors were suspicious. The public thought that if they really were distraught parents, they should be crying and showing more emotion. Essentially, they thought that they needed to look sadder. Of course, Steve and Marlene completely denied any involvement of the disappearance of their daughter. In fact, Marlene even said in an interview, "You don't know what to say. You don't know how to react. There's not a book to read on what to go through when you've had something horrible happen in your life." Both of them also voluntarily took polygraph tests to further prove their innocence. In Marlene's case, she was told that her test results were inconclusive, given the fact that she was so hysterical when she was being given the test, which she later says she figured would happen. She was an absolute mess at the time, like any mother would be when she had just lost her baby. However, the deputies later said that the tests were not inconclusive. They just didn't want to share the results of the tests because they didn't want to spark any more rumors that were already being spread. There were already rumors that Steve and Marlene were having separate affairs and that Steve wasn't even Sabrina's father. The police suspicions of Steve and Marlene just kept growing when their claims that an intruder must have entered the house became less and less believable. They said it was just hard to believe that an intruder could come into the house, take a baby, when the parents are sleeping right across the way, and leave without anybody hearing them. They also said that the cul-de-sac they lived on had one way in and one way out, as well as a big wall wrapped around the neighborhood for extra security. What was even more suspicious is that the Aisenbergs had a dog named Brownie that didn't bark even once. Which is kind of odd. I've had my dog for 15 years and she still barks at me every time I come in the house, so the fact that the dog didn't bark at an intruder is a tad bit odd. However, family friends have said that the reason the dog didn't bark is because it's a super laid-back dog, very relaxed, and isn't really the barking type. But it's still a little confusing because there were other family friends who said the exact opposite, that Brownie was always full of energy and was always barking. So it's kind of hard what to make of that. What made the Aisenbergs seem even more suspicious is that Steve Aisenberg was caught smiling at a police officer's joke on the same day that his daughter had been taken. While a lot of people pointed fingers and said that was completely inappropriate, a lot of people understood and said, you never know how people will emotionally react to their daughter being taken, and maybe he was just trying to be polite to the police officer. The Aisenbergs really felt that they were being looked into way too much. They felt that the police were spending so much time and attention on them that they weren't looking elsewhere at other potential kidnappers. They kept saying that they had nothing to do with the disappearance of their daughter, and they just wanted to find her. But with all this attention on them, they didn't feel like they were getting any closer to reuniting with their baby. It got to the point where Marlene and Steve felt like the police were trying to frame them for the disappearance of their own daughter. Marlene even said that at one point an investigator looked her right in the eye and said, "We believe you know where your daughter is, and we believe you know who has her." And with that, they felt they had no choice but to stop cooperating with the police and get themselves a lawyer. So the police decided, fine, if you're not going to cooperate with us, we're going to gather up all the evidence we can and bug your house with audio recordings. Basically in the hope that they would talk about Sabrina and essentially confess. Thousands of hours of conversations were recorded in the next few months, and the police had to listen to it and transcribe it. The federal grand jury was to listen to the case and actually wanted to hear Marlene and Steve testify, but on the advice of their lawyer, Marlene and Steve decided not to testify. And of course, that did not look good to people. They couldn't understand why the parents of a kidnapped baby wouldn't testify if they really wanted to prove they were innocent. But later on in an interview, Steve Eisenberg said that at the time, that's what they felt was right for them. Social workers were later brought in to examine Sabrina's older siblings, Monica and William, to see if there were any signs of abuse or mistreatment, because that would produce more of an idea if Sabrina was abused or mistreated by her parents. Steve, Marlene, and their lawyers thought that this was a manipulation technique to scare them into thinking that they'd have their children taken away. A year and a half later, after Sabrina's disappearance, the family decided to move to Maryland in May of 1999. It was there in their home on September 9th, 1999, that Marlene was packing up for a family trip that was coming up. But when she looked out her window, she noticed there was a bunch of cars parking right outside her house. And what was even more strange, a bunch of men got out of the car wearing all black and started surrounding her house. They were looking in windows, calling her name, walking all over her driveway, and she was terrified, as I think a lot of us would be. Next thing you know, the group of men broke into her house, and she remembers hearing, "Marlene, come downstairs. Marlene, come downstairs now." So when she went to the staircase to see what was happening, she was met with a gun pointing right at her face. Of course, Marlene was in complete shock and horrified, and when the man told her to put down the phone that was in her hand, she said, "Well, you put down the gun." Eventually, the men wearing all black told her exactly who they were, and they were the FBI. They said that they were here to arrest her for the involvement in her daughter's disappearance, and at the same time, while she was being arrested, her husband Steve was being arrested at his work as well. They were then fingerprinted, had their mugshots taken, and put into separate holding cells so that they wouldn't be able to communicate. The reason why the FBI arrested them is because they finally got around to listening to those audio recordings that they had bugged their house with. And allegedly, they heard some pretty incriminating stuff. In these audio tapes, they allegedly heard Marlene say, "The baby's dead and buried. It was found dead because you did it. The baby's dead no matter what you say. You just did it." And Steve allegedly said, "We need to discuss the way that we can beat the charge. We will do what we have to do." They were charged with conspiracy to murder and lying to investigators, but not murder, because they hadn't found a body. There was no actual proof that Sabrina had been murdered. However, when these top quality audio recordings were played in court, it was just a bunch of mumbling. Everyone there was actually quite puzzled of how it was supposed to mean anything. They couldn't make out a single word. It was just pretty much a bunch of noise. After a bunch of experts actually listened to these recordings and said, yeah, you can't hear anything, they were deemed inadmissible in court. And without these audio recordings, the prosecution really didn't have much. As much as they tried to gather all the evidence that they did have to prosecute them, Steve and Marlene's charges were dropped. After the charges for Steve and Marlene were dropped, the case was pretty quiet for a while, until years later when it emerged in the media that a neighbor had told the police the exact morning that Sabrina went missing that he heard a baby crying when he took his dog out for a pee in the middle of the night. And the reason why this is such an important lead is because he lived far enough away to where if Sabrina was just crying in her own house, he wouldn't have heard her. And he didn't live near any babies at the time. So that baby that he heard in the middle of the night could have potentially been the kidnapper of Sabrina. But unfortunately, the police decided, for whatever reason, not to look into that lead. Unfortunately, the witness that heard the baby crying has passed away, and even if he hadn't passed away, it was years ago that this happened. It would be way too late to investigate at this point. In March 2018, there was a big break in the case when two women came forward claiming that they believed to be Sabrina Aisenberg. They claimed that they had never seen any baby pictures of themselves, which they always found odd. They did give DNA to compare to Steve and Marlene's, but the DNA results are still pending and haven't been released yet. I'm not sure why. I have looked it up and I haven't found any answers on if it is Sabrina or not Sabrina. So it makes me think, I wonder if it was Sabrina and the parents just want to reunite with her, get comfortable, and essentially get to know her before going public. But that is just speculation. That's just a theory I have. Don't quote me. Steve and Marlene said that they think about their daughter every day, and they still have a room made up for her in case she ever comes home. They go into her room every night to say goodnight, and they even buy Christmas presents for the daughter that they never really got to see grow up. They really believe and hope with everything they have that their beautiful daughter will come home to them. Sabrina Aisenberg will be turning 22 June 27th of this year, and I can remember that easily because I will be turning 22 3 days before then. And you know what? She could be out there living her life as a young woman in her early 20s and could have no idea that she's Sabrina. And that's the crazy part. That's why it's so important to get her name out there and pictures out there so that one day she could maybe see something and go, could that be me? Or maybe someone will spot a woman that looks just like her. You never know what could happen, so you just have to keep the hope alive, essentially. So that's it for this case. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really enjoyed making these videos and I would love to continue. So if you could like the video and subscribe, that'd be awesome. And again, if you have any suggestions on cases you want me to cover, I would be happy to do that. And that's it. Keep your wits about you guys. Be aware of your surroundings and have a wonderful day. Bye.
I do things, but how do I know that it'll take me to where I wanna be?